Not for a minute. Those words kept circling in my head all night, pulsing in the dark like a heartbeat I couldn't quiet. The FBI would be on my doorstep, and everything was about to change. By the time dawn broke, my coffee had gone cold, my nerves were shot, and I was standing at the kitchen window staring out at a ranch holding its breath right along with me. The sky was still pale and sleepy, streaked in soft lavender and gold, when I heard it. A distant, low rumble rolling across the fields. At first, I thought it was just one of the ranch hands arriving early. Maybe Ted's ATV or Frank's old Ford. But the sound grew deeper, heavier. More engines than just one. Frank stepped onto the porch, mug in hand, listening. "You hearing what I'm hearing?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Engines." Ted appeared behind him, boots half-laced, eyes sharp with the kind of alertness that never really leaves retired detectives. "That's them," he said quietly. "They're early." Brooke and Rhonda came up from the barn, both stopping dead when they heard it too. That unmistakable, heavy, government-issue growl that doesn't belong anywhere near a horse ranch. Dust lifted over the top of the long gravel drive, and then the first black SUV crested the hill. Then the second. Then the third. All identical. All federal plates. All inevitable. My stomach tightened. Sophie, munching her alfalfa in her morning paddock, lifted her head sharply, ears pricked toward the driveway like she sensed the shift in the air. Ted glanced at me. "This is it, Charlie girl. The tide just turned." I exhaled, steadying myself. "Good," I said. "Let's meet them." The SUVs rolled to a slow stop in front of the house. Doors opened in perfect sync. Men and women stepped out. Jackets marked with the unmistakable lettering that promised the next chapter of this war would be nothing like the last. And as the first agent approached the porch, they didn't move fast or loud. Federal agents never do. They moved with purpose, methodical steps, calm questions, eyes that registered everything. Ted stepped forward to meet them, his posture shifting from investigator to liaison in a heartbeat. The lead agent shook his hand, then mine, then gestured for a walkthrough of the property. Within minutes, Cedar Creek no longer felt like a ranch. It felt like a crime scene. Agents fanned out across the yard, photographing tire tracks, inspecting anything that seemed out of the ordinary. Their quiet murmurs carried across the morning air like the hum of a machine finally turned on. Brooke and Rhonda stood behind me, silent, watching the federal presence sweep across the drive with the kind of precision none of us had ever seen out here. Frank joined Ted near the destroyed tongue jack, answering questions, pointing out what we had documented ourselves. This wasn't chaos anymore. This was structure. This was accountability. This was the turning of the tide. When Marla's car pulled onto the property 20 minutes later, she stepped out already reading through the files an agent had handed her. She didn't waste time. She didn't soften her expression. She walked straight toward Ted with a spine of steel and eyes that said she had finally seen enough. Marla looked at Ted, expression a stiff, firm resolve. "This is no longer prevention," she said. "This is prosecution in motion." And still, we hadn't reached the breaking point. People who are willing to cut a horse are not finished. They are warming up. The sheriff left with a different posture than he arrived. He told Ted quietly as he stepped off the property, "If this escalates again, we move this to detectives." It would escalate again. Ted already knew it. The line between sabotage and violence had been crossed. The line between criminal and malignant was next. After Alfie's injury and euthanasia, the ranch didn't operate normally. It operated on edge. Every sound was evaluated, every light checked twice, every gate latched 3 times. Staff didn't chat anymore. They scanned. Safety had stopped being a routine and become a reflex. Ted changed his posture, too. He wasn't documenting anymore. He was anticipating. "Escalators don't go backwards," he said. "They escalate until they're stopped or they break something that can't be undone." He started sleeping on sight again, not because he doubted the cameras, but because he knew cameras don't intervene. 2 days passed without incident, and that was the warning. Violent people don't strike in rhythm. They strike when the victim exhales. The next hit wasn't subtle. It wasn't a test. It wasn't rehearsal. It was aimed to cause damage that could not be dismissed or repaired in a day. At 3:41 a.m., the motion alerts hit 3 cameras at once. Not perimeter this time, but inside the pasture line. Whoever entered didn't sneak. They advanced. The dogs went off. Ted was out the door before I reached the porch. He didn't run blindly. He moved with the certainty of someone who already knew what phase we had entered. By the time we reached the barn, the target was obvious. It wasn't the buildings this time. It was the animals. The escalation Ted predicted had arrived exactly on schedule. The horse they went after this time wasn't in a far pasture. It was in the main barn. They had come inside. The stall door to one of the mares, a young chestnut named Willow, was halfway off its hinges, kicked or pried with force. She was drenched in sweat, whites of her eyes showing, slamming herself against the walls trying to escape something that had already happened. It wasn't a cut this time, it was chemical. There was a rag on the ground just outside her stall, soaked in something that burned our noses before we even bent down. Ted didn't touch it. "Don't breathe near that," he said, pulling me back by the arm. "They tried to gas her, not to kill, not yet, but to torture, to panic, to break her down from the inside out. That crossed every legal threshold at once. Animal assault, chemical use, forced entry, malice. By the time the sheriff arrived, Ted had the barn sealed off with fans running to clear the air. Marla was already on speakerphone demanding a scene tech and evidence collection, not a patrol response. And this time, law enforcement listened. They called in detectives. They photographed everything. They collected the rag. They took statements like they were building a case file, not a report. When one of the detectives asked who would want to hurt the animals specifically, Ted didn't hesitate. "Someone who tried every other tactic first, and failed." The detective didn't roll his eyes. He nodded. This wasn't harassment anymore in the eyes of the state. This was active animal cruelty under criminal investigation. And everyone in that barn knew. Once someone escalates to harming animals, the next logical step is fire or blood. The investigation opened the way a storm does. Quietly at first, then all at once. Detectives started pulling HOA records, interviewing board members, and requesting digital copies of forum posts and financial logs. What Karen thought was private HOA business was suddenly state evidence. That pressure worked like acid on the board. Within 3 days, 2 members resigned. Not publicly, not heroically. They simply vanished from the roster and deleted their accounts. The treasurer, Eleanor, stopped speaking entirely. Victor sent Marla a second email insisting he had no part in any off-property actions. Nobody was defending Karen anymore. They were fleeing her. That is how you know the ringleader is losing. Loyalty evaporates when liability appears. But Karen didn't go silent out of surrender. She went silent out of calculation. She reappeared not at my gate, not in person, but online, under a new anonymous handle, launching a smear campaign with a different tone. Not persuasion, but panic. Animal abuse cover-up at Cedar Creek. Owner injures horses for insurance. She staged it to blame the HOA. The tactic wasn't to convince strangers. It was to contaminate the narrative before the investigation could define it. Marla read the new posts and didn't look angry. She looked satisfied. She just documented malice and intent to deflect guilt during an active investigation, she said. That's consciousness of wrongdoing. What Karen didn't understand is that once detectives are involved, every lie becomes evidence, and she had just handed them a fresh stack. It happened on a windless night, the kind arsonists wait for. No rain, no movement, no noise to cover the approach. At 2:58 a.m., 3 cameras triggered in sequence. Not perimeter this time, but directly by the hay shed where Ted had found the first line of accelerant days before. He was already halfway to the door before I cleared the porch. This time the accelerant wasn't just poured, it was lit. A low orange tongue of flame was creeping along the soaked baseboard of the shed wall, starting to climb. Not an explosion, A slow, hungry ignition meant to catch and spread before anyone woke. Ted didn't yell. He didn't panic. He moved like a man who had rehearsed this in his mind for days. He grabbed the charged hose he had pre-staged and blasted the flame before it could reach the haystack. The fire died in under 20 seconds. Not because they failed, but because he anticipated them. By the time the sheriff arrived, the accelerant line was still wet, the scorch mark visible, and the ignition source was sitting exactly where an amateur would drop it. A disposable lighter just inside the shed door, abandoned in their rush when the hose hit. "This wasn't an attempt to scare you," the detective said as he photographed the scene. "This was an attempt to start a structure fire. That makes it criminal arson." Marla filed the emergency injunction before sunrise. Ted didn't look relieved that we stopped it. He looked confirmed. "They won't stop now," he said. "This is the point where people either get caught or they escalate to something worse." He didn't have to say what worse meant. We both knew the next target would not be buildings. It would be blood. By the end of that day, the case was no longer being handled by patrol officers. It was reassigned to a detective unit specializing in property crimes and animal cruelty. That shift changed everything. From that moment on, every new incident wasn't just reported. It was added to an active criminal file. Karen must have felt that shift too, because her behavior changed immediately. She stopped using proxies. No more anonymous posts, no more board members carrying her narrative. Instead, a new wave of online activity appeared under burner accounts that sounded like someone screaming through a mask. Frantic, repetitive, desperate. False flag. Insurance scam. She staged it herself. She's framing the HOA. False accusation is always the last refuge of the guilty. They try to rewrite the story before the truth becomes official record. Marla printed every post and slid them into the binder without expression. "Good," she said. "She's panicking on the record." The board fractured even further. 2 more members resigned. The HOA mailing list went silent. Not one of them defended her publicly. They knew investigators were watching, and when people know someone's going down, they stop standing near them. But Karen didn't retreat. She pivoted. When she couldn't control the narrative and couldn't win through sabotage, she did what all cornered offenders do. She looked for a target that would cause maximum personal damage with minimum traceability. Buildings burn and get rebuilt. Money is lost and recovered. Equipment is replaced. But living things, especially the ones you love, break you differently. And the next move she would make wouldn't be against property. It would be against a heartbeat. The barn was too quiet. The kind of quiet you only hear on a ranch before dawn, when even the birds haven't decided if the day is worth waking up for. I was halfway down the breezeway for morning checks, rubbing my eyes, thinking about coffee, when a sound snapped me awake so fast my heart stopped mid-beat. A thud. Heavy. Violent. The kind that's wrong. Then another. I know every sound a horse makes. Impatient pawing, shuffling, stall wall is kicked, because breakfast is late. But this wasn't any of those. This was a body hitting the ground. This was Sophie. Sophie? My voice cracked before I even started running. My boots hammered the aisle. Ted's steps echoed behind me. Fast, precise, sharp. Not the panicked sprint of someone guessing, but the urgency of someone who already feared the truth. I reached her stall first, and froze. She was already down. Down hard. Flat on her side, legs jerking in wild, involuntary spasms that rattled the stall boards. "Sophie, no, baby, no!" I dropped to my knees so fast the concrete bruised through my jeans. Her eyes darted wildly, rolling, whites bright as full moons. Every muscle in her body rippled and clenched like she was being electrocuted. Sweat drenched her from ears to tail, thick, frothy, unnatural. She tried to roll, tried to get her feet under her, but her hind legs slid out and locked stiff, quivering helplessly. "Charlie?" Rhonda's voice was barely a whisper from the doorway. Oh my God. Ted didn't say a word. He stepped into the stall, scanning everything with a controlled fury that vibrated off him like heat. Get back, he snapped suddenly, grabbing my arm. What? No, Ted, she needs... Ted, she... Don't touch that bucket. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. The kind that meant danger. I looked. At first I didn't understand. Then the sight hit me like a train. The water wasn't clear. It wasn't even dirty. It was milky, almost opalescent, with tiny shimmering flecks floating on the surface, catching the flicker of the barn light like chemical glitter. Rhonda gagged. Is that... Ted, is that... Contaminant, he said, kneeling to inspect without getting close. Not natural, not environmental. Introduced. Recently. Sophie groaned, a raw, horrible sound like her soul was being squeezed out of her. I scooped her head into my lap, supporting her, stroking her cheek with shaking hands. I'm here. I'm right here. Stay with me, sweetheart. Sophie's breaths came fast. Too fast. Shallow, choppy, frantic. A fresh tremor rippled through her muscles, forcing her entire body to arch off the ground before collapsing again. She was poisoned, Ted said flatly. The world tilted. No, Ted, no, why would she? His gaze met mine, hard and cold. She didn't target Sophie. A beat. She targeted you. Brooke burst into the barn. Phoenix is acting weird. His bucket smells like bleach. Do not touch it. Get him fresh water now, Ted ordered. Rhonda sprinted. Frank slammed the aisle door shut to keep the dogs out. Frank was shaking so hard he dropped his phone twice before getting Dr. Keon on the line. Sophie jerked again, violently, her hind legs kicking helplessly. I held her tighter, whispering into her ear. I'm right here. Don't leave me. Her body trembled uncontrollably. And for the first time in my life, I felt real fear. Dr. Keon worked in a blur, fast, precise, deadly serious, the same way he had the night Alfie went down. But this time something in his expression was different. Fear. Real professional fear. He hooked up the IV line, hung a second bag, pressed a stethoscope hard to her chest. Her heart rate's unstable, he muttered. Arrhythmias, severe tremors, neurotoxicity. We're losing time. Sophie's muscles seized again, jerking her entire body violently against the ground. Rhonda covered her mouth. It's just like Alfie all over again. Brooke steadied her. Rhonda folded into Brooke, shaking. Ted stood rigid, not yelling or pacing, just a silent storm made of pure rage. This wasn't a scare tactic, Dr. Keon said, pushing another drug through the line. This was meant to kill her. My heart shattered. Please, oh please save her. She's... Help me help her, he murmured. Talk to her. Keep her conscious. I stroked Sophie's face, tears falling into her coat. Stay with me, baby, stay with me. Then Sophie's breathing changed. Fast. Then slower. Then... nothing. Her chest stopped. I screamed her name. Dr. Keon shoved me aside gently but firmly. I've got her. Move. He injected atropine straight into the catheter. Come on. Come on. Brooke cried into Rhonda's shoulder. Even Frank turned away, trembling. Ted closed his eyes in pain. Then, a tremor, a gasp, a shallow breath. Then another. She's back, Dr. Keon breathed. But she's not stable. We fight now. He kept working, sweat dripping down his temples. Ted, I whispered, why would she do this? He looked at the contaminated bucket. She didn't poison Sophie, he said softly. She poisoned her to break you. She wanted to see you fold, too scared to keep fighting anymore. The words nearly dropped me to the floor. Dr. Keon wiped his forehead. 10 more minutes and she would have been gone. We need to run blood work now. Someone stay with her. She cannot be left alone. I'm not leaving her, I said, collapsing beside her again. Sophie's eyelids fluttered. She was still with us. Barely. But she was still here. And that was enough for hope to breathe. Just once. In a barn full of shattered hearts. Dr. Quillen swallowed hard, forcing himself to move despite the grief clouding his face. He gently lifted Sophie's lip to check again, maybe hoping he'd been wrong. But the sight hit him like a blow. Her gums, they weren't pink. They weren't pale. They were almost colorless, drained of life entirely, like someone had taken an eraser to everything that made her a living creature. He let her lip fall softly back into place, his hand trembling. "This was deliberate," he whispered. "There's no natural cause for gums that white. She was hemorrhaging from the inside." Rhonda pressed her forehead to my shoulder, crying so hard her whole body shook. Brooke staggered back against the partition, covering her mouth, tears spilling down her face as she stared at Sophie's now, still form. Ted didn't move for a long moment. He just stood there at the threshold of the stall, fists clenched at his sides, jaw locked so tight the muscle in his cheek twitched. His eyes, God, his eyes. They looked like a storm waiting to break. But he didn't break. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't punch a wall. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, as if approaching a fallen soldier, and crouched beside Sophie's head. He reached out and placed one hand gently against her cheekbone, thumb brushing the velvety hair beneath her eye. "I'm sorry, girl," he murmured, voice cracking in a way I had never heard from him before. "You didn't deserve this. Not you." Then he stood and something in him switched off. Not his emotions, not entirely. His mercy. The part of Ted that still believed people like Karen could be handled the normal way. With diplomacy, that part died with Sophie. Rhonda pulled me closer, helping me sit up because my legs no longer obeyed me. I reached for Sophie's face again, stroking the damp hair, whispering broken apologies through shaking breaths. "I raised her," I sobbed, barely forming words. "She was just a baby. Ron, she was just a baby." Rhonda held me tighter, voice barely more than a rasp. I know, sweetheart. I know exactly how it feels. You don't deserve this. None of us do." Her tears mixed with mine. Two women who had now lost their heart horses in the exact same cruel way, poisoned by the same hands, the same hatred. Frank arrived next, breathless, and froze the moment he saw Sophie. "No," he whispered. "Not her, not Sophie." His eyes went red immediately. He wiped his face, failing to hide it. Dr. Quillen straightened slowly, pulling himself together out of pure professionalism, even though his shoulders trembled with grief. "We need to document everything," he said softly. "Every bruise, every seizure, every sign of hemorrhage. This isn't just a poisoning. It's a federal-level crime." Ted stepped beside him, voice low and deadly calm. "Oh, it will be documented. You mark my words, it will. All of it. And when this goes to court, I want every one of those bastards in cuffs." Ted looked at me, really looked at me, and I could see something in his gaze shift from grief to war. "Charlie," he said quietly, "she crossed a line today she can't come back from." I couldn't answer. I couldn't breathe. I just kept stroking Sophie's face, rocking slightly, feeling the cold settle in my chest. A cold I knew would never fully leave. Rhonda didn't let go of me for a second. "Let's get her a blanket," Brooke whispered through tears. She shouldn't just be lying there like that." Frank nodded, wiping his face again. "I'll get one." But Ted stopped him gently. "Don't disturb anything yet. Evidence first." Frank nodded slowly, jaw trembling. The barn was silent except for our breathing. Ragged, uneven, broken. Sophie's body lay still in the center of her stall, surrounded by the people who loved her. My girl, my heart, my future, gone. And as the weight of it pressed down on us, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing on this ranch would ever be the same again. Not after this. Not after Sophie. The ranch slept lightly that night. No one trusted the darkness anymore. Not after everything it had taken. But as the last of the porch lights dimmed and the wind moved through the old oak like a morning hymn, something inside me shifted. Not healed. Not whole. But hardened. Sophie was gone. Alfie was gone. And the line between harassment and warfare had been burned straight through. Ted walked the property one last time before dawn, shoulders squared, jaw set like stone. And when he finally stepped onto the porch, the look in his eyes said everything. We weren't playing defense anymore. The ranch was done enduring. The next move would be ours. And as the first light touched the ashes beneath the oak, I realized the truth. Sophie's last gift wasn't just the love she gave me. It was the fire she left behind. The days that followed felt wrong in a way I couldn't shake. 2 quiet, brittle weeks after Sophie's poisoning, where the ranch breathed like it was afraid to exhale. Nothing dramatic happened. No strange cars on the road. No unexpected visits. But everything felt charged. Horses paced their stalls at night. Guardian couldn't settle, patrolling the house in slow, restless circles with a low, unsettled growl. And I kept waking at odd hours, heart racing for reasons I couldn't name. Something was coming. I felt it like pressure behind my ribs, a warning you don't hear so much as sense. And then, just past 1 a.m, exactly 2 weeks after I buried Sophie next to Alfie, the storm finally broke. 2 engines roared hard enough to rattle the windows and jolted me fully awake. At that hour, nothing about that sound was normal. Guardian launched off the bed with a violent bark, nails skidding across the floor as he bolted toward the front door. I grabbed my flashlight and ran after him. The second I stepped onto the porch, the cold hit me. But it was the sight beyond the front gate that froze my blood. Our pickup truck, parked beside our 2-horse trailer, was sitting in the public parking area, just outside my gate. I didn't know who they were. Didn't have time to wonder. Because the 2 large, dark SUVs were tearing down the road, building speed, engines screaming like they were hunting. The first SUV swung into the lot at a sharp angle, gravel flying. It lined up with the truck and hit it full force. Metal detonated against metal. The truck jerked sideways, frame twisting, hood buckling upward as the whole rig screamed under the impact. Before it even finished sliding, the SUV reversed hard and rammed the truck a second time. The front end lifted clean off the ground before slamming back down in a shower of glass. The truck was already done. The second SUV came from the opposite direction, bigger and heavier, and zeroed in on the parked trailer. It hit the back doors so violently they caved inward like crushed foil. The trailer lurched, coupler twisting, nearly snapping the hitch clean off. Without hesitation, the SUV reversed 30 feet, engine snarling like something feral, then slammed into the side of the trailer as it T-boned it with unbelievable force. The wall collapsed inward with a metallic roar. Welds snapped. The whole trailer buckled and sagged, barely held together by twisted steel. In less than 90 seconds, both the truck and trailer were complete write-offs. Then, just as quickly as they came, both SUVs swung back toward the road. Engines roared, tires shrieked, and they vanished into the dark, gravel spraying behind them. No plates. No hesitation. No chance to chase. 4 hits. 2 totaled vehicles. Gone. Inside the ranch, panic erupted. Horses screamed and slammed into stall walls, convinced something was breaking through to kill them. Lights flickered on in the guest house. Doors slammed. Someone yelled my name. Rhonda and Brooke sprinted across the yard toward me, breathless, hair wild, flashlights shaking. "Charlie, what in the hell was that?" I sighed and pointed straight at the mangled wreckage outside the gate, chest heaving, hands trembling from the adrenaline still burning through my veins. They used the goddamned road for speed," I said quietly. 2 SUVs, One hit the truck twice. The other hit the trailer twice. They didn't step foot on the property. Rhonda stared at the destruction, face drained of color. Brooke swallowed hard beside her, voice barely above a whisper. They didn't have to. And just like that, the truth settled over all three of us. Heavy, cold, undeniable. This wasn't vandalism. This was an attack. By dawn, the ranch was still on edge, the horses exhausted from the night's chaos, their stalls scuffed where hooves had slammed against wood in panic. Guardian and Valor stuck to my side, their tails stiff, noses constantly lifted to the wind as if they expected the attackers to come back at any moment. Around 6 a.m., the rumble of tires on gravel signaled the arrival of the sheriff's department. 2 patrol units, 1 unmarked SUV. And shortly after, the county's forensic crash team rolled in. White van, floodlights, markers, the whole scene lit like an outdoor lab. Sheriff Whitmore stepped out first, jaw set, hat pulled low. His breath fogged in the cold morning as he approached the shattered fencing and wreckage. Ted and Frank arrived seconds later. Frank in his plainclothes jacket, Ted in that old dark coat that somehow made him look even more like the detective he used to be. "Jesus, Murphy," Whitmore muttered, surveying the mangled truck and collapsed trailer. They meant business. Ted didn't say anything at first. He just studied the tire tracks. Deep gouges where the SUVs had launched off the asphalt. The arcing turn marks in the gravel. The retreat pattern. His eyes followed every inch with practiced precision. Frank crouched near the twisted trailer frame, running a gloved hand along the crushed metal. 2 vehicles, he said quietly. Heavy ones. SUVs, full-frame builds, late model by the tread depth. They hit with intent. Whitmore nodded grimly. That's what it looks like. No, Ted corrected, voice calm but razor sharp. That's what it is. This wasn't reckless joyriding. They built speed off the main road, struck with coordinated impact points, then fled without hesitation. Someone planned this. The forensics techs got to work, setting down numbered markers, measuring skid lengths, photographing debris, and collecting metal fragments that had broken off during the impacts. One of them knelt close to the smashed tailgate of the truck, carefully tweezing out a piece of embedded paint. "Transfer coat," she said. "Dark, probably from the first SUV." Frank exhaled through his nose. "With luck, we'll get a partial make or model." Ted looked unconvinced. "These people aren't stupid. They wouldn't use vehicles traceable to them." Whitmore rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We'll run what we can." Guardian let out a low growl beside me, still staring down the road as if the night's ghosts were lingering at the tree line, while Valor sniffed up and down the fence perimeter. Frank glanced at him. "He's still on high alert?" "He hasn't settled since it happened," I said quietly. They both knew something was wrong, even before I was even out of bed. Ted gave a small nod. "Animals pick up things before we do, especially him." A crash tech called out from the edge of the gravel pull-off. "Sheriff, over here!" We all turned. He had found the launch marks, the exact spots where each SUV had floored the gas, tires shredding into the road surface before veering into the lot. Whitmore walked over, hands on his hips. 2 separate launch points, the tech said. 1 on each side of the road, timed just right, and no hesitation on withdrawal. "Coordinated," Ted murmured. Frank straightened, eyes narrowing. "This wasn't amateur hour. Somebody orchestrated this to cause maximum damage without stepping foot past her gate." Whitmore looked at me then, voice low and serious. "Charlie, I need to ask. Anyone holding a grudge? Anyone who'd escalate to this level?" I let out a shaky exhale. "You already know the answer." Ted stepped closer to Whitmore. "We're not naming anyone yet, but you need to start looking at Vista Hills. Not the residents. The leadership." Whitmore stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'll pull county road footage. Maybe we get lucky." Ted's jaw tightened. "We didn't get lucky last night." They got bold. And bold people make mistakes. Frank looked from the smashed truck to the collapsed trailer, then out to the empty road. And somebody, he said quietly, wanted to send Charlie a message loud enough to wake every animal on this ranch. Valor growled again, longer and deeper, standing there in the cold morning light, surrounded by shattered metal and splintered rails. I realized the truth. The message had been received, but so had my resolve. I wasn't backing down, not now, not ever. Frank stepped away to talk to one of the crash techs, while Whitmore got pulled aside by his deputy, leaving a strange, heavy quiet between the four of us. Guardian nudged my hand with his nose, whining softly now instead of growling, sensing the shift from danger to aftermath. He stayed pressed against me as if he could hold the world together with his shoulder, while Valor stayed to my other side. Rhonda crouched near the fence line, fingertips brushing the broken boards, shaking her head in disbelief. Brooke stood beside her for a moment, silent, before her breath hitched. Barely at first, then sharper, like a glass cracking under pressure. She stepped back, covering her mouth with both hands. This is too much," she whispered. "Sophie, Alfie, now this? What's next? How far are these people willing to go?" Rhonda stood and wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. Hey, we're okay. Nobody's hurt. We can rebuild a fence. We can borrow a rig. We're not alone." But even her voice wavered at the edges. Ted moved closer to them, not touching, just standing near enough to steady the air around us. "They hit hard because they're desperate," he said quietly. "People don't escalate like this unless something behind them is collapsing." Brooke wiped her eyes. "It doesn't feel like they're the ones collapsing." Frank returned then, nodding to the forensic tech. "They're collecting what they can. Paint transfer, metal fragments, tread impressions. But this wasn't amateurs. They used clean vehicles, no plates. They came in and out too fast to catch anything on county cams." Whitmore approached again. "Deputies checked both ends of the road. Nothing. Whoever did this turned off onto one of the side lanes or cut across the old fire road. They knew the area." Ted muttered something under his breath, dark, low, and exchanged a look with Frank I didn't fully understand but absolutely felt. They were thinking the same thing. This wasn't random. This was someone with a plan. Someone who'd scouted. Someone who believed they'd get away with it. Frank waited until Whitmore walked back to the deputy again before lowering his voice. "Ted, you see it too, right?" Ted didn't hesitate. "Yeah. What?" I asked. "They're testing boundaries," Ted said. "Seeing how fast you respond. Seeing who shows up. Seeing how law enforcement reacts. They didn't step foot on your land, but they got damn close." He paused. "This is a fishing expedition. Someone's probing for weaknesses." Frank exhaled slowly through his nose. "And the lack of a trailer? That's just the bonus. They crippled you logistically, but the real intention was deeper. They wanted to rattle the entire ranch. Get inside your head." I felt it then, the cold realization settling into my bones. The fence could be repaired. The rig could eventually be replaced. But what they had really done was try to break the sense of safety Cedar Creek had always lived by. I whispered to Brooke. "But why? Why us?" 7,500 acres, 5 minutes from town," Ted replied. "A medium lake they've already circled on a map and labeled community amenity. Trails, existing arenas, a cross-country course, and behind it all, 1,500 untouched acres. Flat enough to sell peace at a big fat profit. You're not just another neighbor to them, Charlie girl. You're a goddamned gold mine in boots. And we all know Karen Livingston will stop at nothing to get what she wants." The answer hung there, heavy with too many possible meanings. Rhonda looked at me. "Charlie, I think we know why." I nodded, throat tight. "Yeah, we do." Ted turned to me again, expression serious but steady. "This isn't the end game. This is the midpoint, the build-up. They want a reaction. They want disruption. They want pressure. His eyes narrowed, and they're about to get the opposite. Frank placed a hand on my shoulder, reassuring and grounding. We're not letting this place fall apart. We'll get you a temporary rig. We'll rotate night watches if we have to. They pushed first. Now we push back. Harder. I took a shaky breath as Guardian pressed into my side again. The sun was climbing over the hills, casting long beams across the broken boards and twisted metal. And somewhere in that light I felt Sophie, steady, watching, protective. I straightened. All right, then let them come. We're not rolling over, not for Karen, not for anyone. Frank smirked faintly. Atta baby. That's what I needed to hear. The forensics team began packing their cases. Whitmore gathered his notes. Patrol units headed out. The parking area slowly emptied, leaving behind only the shattered wreckage and the long scar of tire tracks carved across the gravel like a warning. Ted and Frank lingered after the deputies left, trading a low, brief conversation I couldn't fully catch. Something about patterns, escalation paths, and timing. When they finished, Ted looked at me again. Be ready, he said softly. The next move won't come from the dark. It'll come bold, daylight or not. People like this escalate in waves. Frank nodded once. And 1 a.m. smash and run isn't even close to their peak. A chill ran down my spine. Ted stepped closer. Stay sharp today. Stay close to the house. Don't wander alone. Brooke and Rhonda keep to the barns. Frank and I will be in and out. Why? I asked, though part of me already knew. Because, Ted said, voice heavier now. Once you hit the point of doubling down, people like this always try something bigger to regain control. Frank folded his arms. And if our hunch is right, that next move isn't going to be anonymous. Guardian whined softly, pressing closer. The air thickened again, charged with that same storm pressure feeling that had been building all week. And that was when I knew. We were no longer dealing with scare tactics. We were stepping into the escalation phase, where fear stops being shadows and becomes something that looks you in the eyes. The calm after the crash wasn't peace. It was the breath someone takes right before they strike again. Morning didn't bring relief. It brought clarity. I barely slept, none of us did. Every creak of the house, every distant car on the road made Guardian lift his head with a low growl. My mind replayed the impacts, the way the SUVs moved with purpose, the way the truck and trailer folded under them. I kept asking myself the same question, if they'd do that. What else are they willing to do? By the time the first pale blue of dawn seeped into the sky, the answer settled in my chest like a weight. Whatever this was now, it wasn't going to slow down. And when I walked into the kitchen, the sight waiting for me confirmed it. The ranch didn't settle after the crash. It didn't breathe. It only waited, tight, brittle, bracing for whatever came next. Valor lifted his head before I heard anything, a low warning rumbling in his chest. I stepped onto the porch, expecting Karen, expecting headlights on the road, expecting the next punch. What I got instead was a woman stumbling up my driveway like she had crawled through the night to get here. Border Patrol pants torn at the knee, shoes coated in dust, hair wild, a worn duffel bag swinging loosely at her side. Is Frank Hunter here? She asked, voice cracking. Ted was at my side in an instant, eyes narrowing. Hillary? She nodded once, then folded as if her legs simply quit. Not in drama. From exhaustion and heartbreak so deep her bones couldn't carry it anymore. Frank came running from behind the barn the moment he heard her voice. Hillary, good God, sit. What in Sam hell happened to you? Where have you been? Her breaths came in sharp, broken gasps. I don't have a home anymore. And the truth spilled out, shaky, fragmented, devastating. Karen had wanted her land for months. 95 acres of pasture, a tidy barn, an outdoor ring. When Hillary wouldn't sell or leave willingly, Karen found another way. A duffel bag full of fake heroin, powdered sugar and aspirin, planted conveniently in her barn. Karen tipped off the police. Hillary was arrested, booked, and thrown into jail. She spent a month and a half behind bars while tests crawled through the system. Frank's jaw clenched. Hillary continued through shaky breaths. So I called Marla. She told them to force the lab. They finally did. And it all came back negative. Completely fake. She came and got me, took me home. But it didn't matter, Hillary whispered. When I got back, my barn was demolished. My house half torn down. My riding ring gone. My fencing gone. 2 asshat rent-a-goons stood at the driveway like 2 freaking gargoyles. My whole property was cordoned off with chain-link fencing. They told me I was trespassing on my own goddamn land. Signs all over the damned place. No trespassing. HOA, property. Members only. Her breath broke. They even sold all of my horses. Every damned one of them. A sound left her then. Low, breaking, devastating. Where have you been staying? I asked softly. My car. Until it got towed. Compliments of that tyrant bitch Karen Livingston. Something cracked in my chest. You're staying here tonight. Guest room on the main floor. You're safe now. Her lip trembled. I don't want to be a burden. You're not, I said. Not here. Frank nodded. Charlie's right. You're home for now. Hillary cried again, but this time it sounded like relief. By midweek, her breathing was steadier, but her hands still trembled each time she remembered her horses, her barn, her home. I saddled 2 lesson horses, not to distract her, but to give her sky and movement. Something bigger than the fear crushing her. Come on, I said gently. There's a pond on the north end of the property. Sometimes the world feels wider from there. And the fishing's great, too. We rode quietly, Guardian and Valor trotting ahead. Hillary loosened her reins the farther we went. But halfway up the ridge, the wind shifted, carrying something sharp and chemical. Do you smell that? She whispered. I did. When we crested the clearing, the pond came into view, and I froze. The water wasn't blue. It wasn't green. It was wrong. A thick, oily sheen sat across the surface, swirling in sickly yellows and greens. The reeds along the bank were wilted and brown. Even the cattails were collapsing. Then I saw them. Dozens of fish floating belly up. White bodies drifting in slow circles, some blistered, all dead. And then we saw the source. 3 rusted drums shoved into the reeds. One tipped and leaking an opaque trail into the water. Hazard labels still visible. Radioactive materials. Danger. Toxic waste. Do not tamper. My stomach flipped. I pulled out my phone. Ted, you and Frank need to get to the North Pond. Bring Whitmore. This is contamination. Ted arrived first on his ATV. The second he saw the barrels, his entire posture changed, stiffening into professional, lethal focus. He crouched by the leaking drum and scanned the labels. This is deliberate dumping, he said. This wasn't here yesterday. He made the calls himself. Clipped, all business. EPA, this is Investigator Redding. Immediate response, active contamination. Then the next, State Environmental Response Team. Then, County Hazmat. Frank arrived behind him on his ATV, face tight. This wasn't meant to be found until it spread. Whitmore came last, took one look, removed his hat, and exhaled. Charlie, this is a federal crime scene. Hillary stared at the pond with wide, wet eyes. She destroyed my home, and now she's targeting yours. I didn't speak, because I already knew she was right. When the EPA trucks rolled in and hazmat teams taped off the area, the truth settled like a stone in my chest. Karen wasn't done. She was only escalating.